The massive council chamber stretched high above the assembled delegates. 12 different alien species sat in their designated areas, their eyes fixed on the lone human figure standing in the center. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, waiting for the judgment that would change everything. The Zephyrian Judge Prime rose from his crystal throne. His body sparkled like living glass, and his voice echoed through the chamber with cold authority. The Galactic Council has reached its decision regarding the human species and their activities in Council space. Sarah kept her face calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She had known this day would come. For months, the other species had been building their case against humanity. They called it a trial, but everyone knew it was really about fear. The evidence against the human species is overwhelming, the Judge Prime continued. His crystalline features showed no emotion. They have engaged in aggressive expansion across the Outer Rim territories. They have contaminated local cultures with their own beliefs and practices. They have disrupted the natural order that has kept peace in our galaxy for over 1,000 years. Sarah almost laughed at the accusations. Aggressive expansion? Humans had only settled on empty worlds or planets that other species had declared worthless. Cultural contamination? They had shared medical knowledge that saved millions of lives and farming techniques that ended famines. Disrupting the natural order? They had stopped 3 wars and prevented countless smaller conflicts through patient diplomacy. But she said nothing. There was no point in arguing now. The Kavari representative stood next, his warrior's armor gleaming under the chamber's lights. The humans spread their weakness throughout the galaxy, he growled. They make other species soft with their ideas about cooperation and peace. They interfere where they are not wanted. The Dolari Consortium leader nodded, his multiple arms gesturing as he spoke. Human traders refuse to follow proper business practices. They give away technology instead of selling it. They help primitive species advance too quickly. This disrupts market stability. One by one, the other species added their voices to the chorus of complaints. The melody spoke of humans who taught mental shielding techniques to other races, breaking their monopoly on psychic services. The Aquari complained about human scientists who cleaned up their polluted oceans without asking for payment. The Boreshi were angry that humans had prevented them from strip mining several asteroid belts by proving the rocks contained rare ecosystems. Sarah listened to it all with growing understanding. This was not about human crimes. This was about human kindness and how it made other species look bad by comparison. The Council finds the human species guilty of all charges, the Judge Prime announced. The sentence is as follows: immediate cessation of all human expansion beyond current territory, withdrawal from all contested systems, and payment of reparations totaling 50 billion standard credits for damages to galactic stability. The chamber erupted in satisfied murmurs from most of the alien delegates. A few species remained silent, particularly the younger races that had benefited most from human assistance, but they were outnumbered by the older, more powerful civilizations that had grown tired of human interference. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of all the human colonies that would have to be abandoned, all the research stations that would be shut down, all the peacekeeping missions that would end, all the people who would suffer when humans could no longer help them. When she opened her eyes, every being in the chamber was watching her. They expected anger. They expected protests and threats. They expected humans to act like every other species did when faced with an unfavorable ruling, with rage and defiance. I request a 30-minute recess to consult with my government, Sarah said quietly. The Judge Prime looked surprised but agreed. Sarah walked to the small communication booth reserved for her use. She did not need 30 minutes to get Earth's response. The decision had been made before she ever set foot in this chamber. Humanity had seen this coming and prepared accordingly. When the council reconvened, Sarah returned to the center of the chamber. The alien delegates leaned forward, eager to hear her response. Some of the warriors actually looked disappointed that she had not brought weapons or issued challenges to combat. Sarah looked around the chamber one more time. She saw species that humanity had helped survive plagues and civil wars and develop new technologies. She saw others that had benefited from human trade, human mediation, and human protection. And she saw the fear in their eyes, fear that their own people would start asking why they could not be more like humans. Humanity accepts the Council's judgment, she said in a clear, calm voice. "We will comply fully with all requirements." The silence that followed was deafening. Several delegates exchanged glances. The Kavari warrior actually looked confused. The Dalari merchant's multiple eyes blinked rapidly. "You accept?" the Judge Prime asked, his crystal voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Yes," Sarah replied. "We will begin withdrawal from contested systems immediately. We will cease all expansion activities. We will prepare the reparation payments as ordered." The chamber erupted in whispers and confused chatter. This was not how other species responded to adverse rulings. Usually there were appeals, threats, negotiations, and sometimes even wars. The Kavari had once tried to conquer half the galaxy, rather than accept a council decision they disliked. The Dolari had imposed trade sanctions that nearly caused a galactic recession. Even the peaceful Melody had spent decades fighting a ruling through every possible legal channel. But the humans simply accepted it. "Is there anything else the council requires?" Sarah asked politely. The Judge Prime seemed to shake himself out of his surprise. No, that concludes these proceedings. You have 6 months to complete all requirements." Sarah bowed slightly to the assembly. "Thank you for your time. Humanity will remember the council's decision." Something about the way she said those last words sent a chill through the chamber. It was not a threat exactly. It was more like a promise. Or perhaps a warning. As Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave, several of the younger species delegates approached her. The Yithran representative, whose people had been saved from extinction by human medical intervention just 5 years earlier, looked stricken. "Ambassador Chen," he whispered, "surely you will appeal this decision. It is unjust." Sarah gave him a sad smile. "The council has spoken. Humanity will respect its authority. But what about the research station on our homeworld? What about the medical supplies? The agricultural advisors?" "All human personnel will be withdrawn as ordered," Sarah replied gently. "I am sorry." As she walked toward the exit, other delegates called out similar questions. What about the peacekeeping force in the neutral zone? What about the terraforming project on Kepler 442b? What about the trade routes that humans protected from pirates? Sarah's answer was always the same. All human activities would cease as ordered. By the time she reached the chamber doors, an uncomfortable quiet had settled over the assembly. The victorious species who had pushed for this judgment suddenly looked less certain. The Kavari commander was frowning at his datapad, probably realizing that his clan territories bordered the human-protected neutral zone. The Dalari merchant was calculating the cost of replacing human security for his trade routes, but it was too late for second thoughts. The decision had been made. Humanity had accepted it with grace and dignity, and somehow that made it all the more terrifying. Sarah paused at the chamber entrance and looked back one final time. "The human species wishes the Galactic Council continued prosperity and peace," she said formally. Then she left, and the council was alone with the consequences of their choice. 3 weeks after the council's decision, the human exodus began. Across hundreds of worlds and dozens of star systems, humans packed their belongings with the same quiet efficiency they had once used to build thriving communities. There were no protests, no angry speeches, no dramatic gestures. Just methodical professional departure. On Kepler 442b, Dr. Elena Martinez supervised the shutdown of the atmospheric research station. The facility had taken 8 years to build and had been producing breakthrough discoveries about weather control on terraformed worlds. Now she was dismantling it piece by piece, carefully cataloging every component. Her Melody research partner, Kythera, watched with growing distress. The tall, blue-skinned telepath's psychic projections flickered with anxiety. "Elena, surely this is not necessary." The research station was built before the contested territory's ruling. "It should be exempt." Elena looked up from the atmospheric processor she was disconnecting. "The council was very clear, Kythera. All human expansion activities must cease. That includes research facilities built during the expansion period. But the atmospheric data, the climate models, we are only 2 years away from completing the planetary weather grid." Elena's hands never stopped working as she spoke. "I'm transferring all our research data to your computer systems. The atmospheric processors will continue operating on automatic for about 6 months. After that, you'll need to perform manual calibrations." She handed Kythera a thick datapad containing thousands of pages of technical specifications. "Everything you need to know is in here. The maintenance schedules, the backup procedures, the emergency protocols. Kithara's psychic abilities let her sense Elena's emotions despite the human's calm exterior. She felt deep sadness but no anger, no resentment, just a profound disappointment that made the melody's own heartache. Elena, I voted against this decision in our planetary assembly. Many of us did. We tried to convince the council delegate to change his position. Elena smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. I know you did, Kithara. I'm grateful for that. But the decision is made. Humanity will respect it. In the Vega system, Captain James Harrison prepared to withdraw his peacekeeping fleet from the neutral zone. For 30 years, human ships had patrolled the buffer space between the Kavari clans, preventing the ancient enemies from resuming their blood wars. The zone had become so peaceful that trade routes now ran through it, and several species had established mining operations on the asteroids there. Kavari Commander Gektar met Harrison aboard the human flagship for the final transfer of authority. The massive reptilian warrior looked uncomfortable as he reviewed the data files Harrison was providing. These patrol routes, Gektar rumbled, his scarred face frowning at the tactical displays. They require constant adjustment based on clan movement patterns. How did you predict where conflicts would arise? Harrison pointed to a complex algorithm on the screen. We developed this early warning system over 3 decades. It analyzes communication patterns, resource claims, and historical grievances to predict where tensions might escalate. The AI system will continue running for about a year, but after that you'll need to monitor clan activities manually. And these diplomatic protocols? There are hundreds of pages of procedures for different types of disputes. Every situation we've encountered, along with successful resolution strategies, Harrison explained. Your people are warriors, Commander. You understand strength and honor, but keeping peace sometimes requires different tools. Gektar's claws tapped against the metal table. Human tools. Effective tools, Harrison corrected gently. They work because they address the root causes of conflict, not just the symptoms. The Kavari commander studied the human captain's face. You do not seem angry about this withdrawal. Your people built something valuable here. You are being forced to abandon it. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. We built it to keep peace, Commander. If we fought the Council's decision, that would just create more conflict. That goes against everything we were trying to accomplish. After Harrison's fleet departed, Gektar stood alone in the neutral zone command center, staring at screens full of human-designed monitoring systems and diplomatic protocols. He had spent his entire career fighting wars. Now he was supposed to prevent them using methods he did not fully understand. On the agricultural world of New Eden, the human colonists prepared for the most difficult evacuation of all. They were not just leaving behind homes and farms, but thriving communities that had taken 2 generations to build. The planet had been barren when they arrived. Now it was a garden world that fed 3 star systems. Maria Santos, the colony's administrator, stood in the main square addressing the mixed crowd of humans and alien settlers who had made New Eden their home. Representatives from 6 different species had chosen to live alongside the human colonists, attracted by their inclusive policies and innovative farming techniques. We have 6 weeks to complete the evacuation, Maria announced. All humans must leave as ordered by the Council. The infrastructure and facilities will remain for those who choose to stay. A Boreshi farmer raised one of his forearms. Administrator Santos, who will manage the water distribution systems, the crop rotation schedules, the soil treatment programs? Maria gestured to a young Aquari technician standing nearby. Tidal has been training with our agricultural team for 3 years. She knows the systems as well as any human. We're also leaving complete documentation for everything. But what about the expansion into the southern continent? Asked a Yithran settler. The soil preparation was scheduled to begin next month. The expansion will have to be canceled, Maria replied. We're sorry, but we cannot provide any assistance that might be considered continued expansion activity. An elderly human farmer stepped forward. His family had been among the first colonists. I was born on Earth, but my children were born here. This is their home. Can't they stay? Maria's voice grew gentle. The council ruling applies to all humans, Isaac, I'm sorry. The crowd fell silent. Many of the alien settlers looked stricken. They had come to New Eden not just for the farming opportunities, but for the community the humans had created. A place where different species worked together as equals, where conflicts were resolved through discussion rather than dominance. where everyone's contributions were valued. As the humans prepared to leave, they transferred ownership of everything they could not take with them. The community center became property of the local Ythran family. The medical clinic was given to the Aquari healers. The school was turned over to a council of all species represented in the colony, but everyone knew it would not be the same. The humans had not just built buildings and farms. They had built a culture of cooperation and mutual support that might not survive their absence. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On mining worlds, humans transferred operation of safety systems that had reduced industrial accidents by 90%. On research stations, they handed over breakthrough technologies that other species barely understood. On trade routes, they left behind security protocols that had kept piracy at bay for decades. Everywhere, the pattern was the same. Humans left detailed instructions, trained local replacements as best they could, and departed without complaint. They did not sabotage anything. They did not take resources that belonged to joint projects. They did not even take back technologies they had freely shared. But as ship after ship lifted off from worlds across the galaxy, carrying humans toward the frontier beyond council space, the true scope of their departure became clear. They had not just been participants in galactic civilization. They had quietly become its caretakers, maintaining systems and relationships that other species had taken for granted. The council had ordered them to leave. They were leaving, and the galaxy was about to learn what it had lost. 6 months after the last human transport ship disappeared beyond the galactic frontier, the first cracks began to show in the carefully ordered galaxy the council had sought to preserve. Kythera stood in the atmospheric control center on Kepler 442b, staring at warning lights that had never blinked before during all her years working with the humans. The planetary weather system was failing, and she did not know why. The atmospheric processors are operating within normal parameters, her Melody assistant reported, his mental projections tinged with confusion. But the pressure readings in the northern hemisphere are becoming unstable. Kythera consulted the thick manual Elena had left behind. The technical language was precise, but it assumed knowledge she did not possess. The humans had made atmospheric management look effortless, adjusting systems with an intuitive understanding that came from years of experience. According to this, she said, flipping through pages of diagrams, we need to recalibrate the ionospheric resonators to compensate for seasonal variations in solar radiation, but I do not understand how to calculate the proper frequency adjustments. A soft alarm chimed throughout the facility. The main atmospheric processor was showing signs of stress. Without proper calibration, it was working harder than designed, wearing out components that were never meant to operate under such strain. Kythera closed her eyes and reached out with her psychic abilities, trying to sense any human minds within communication range. For decades, Melody telepaths had relied on human mental shields to protect them from the chaotic emotional broadcasts of other species. But now all she felt was the familiar static of unshielded alien thoughts pressing against her consciousness. The psychic storm hit 3 days later. Without human-designed mental barriers, the accumulated emotional energy of millions of beings on nearby worlds overwhelmed the Melody homeworld's natural defenses. Telepaths across the planet collapsed as their minds were flooded with foreign thoughts and feelings. Kythera was among the fortunate few who remained conscious, but even she could barely function through the mental chaos. Emergency medical teams composed entirely of non-telepathic species struggled to help victims they could not properly communicate with. In the Vega system, Commander Gektar watched his tactical displays with growing alarm. 3 separate incidents had erupted between Kavari clans in the past week, each one escalating faster than his forces could respond. The human early warning system had shut down 2 months ago, leaving him to guess where the next conflict might arise. Commander, his communications officer reported, Clan Vorthak is moving battlecruisers toward the Zetekra mining claims in Sector 7. Gektar studied the star charts. According to human protocols, this type of resource dispute required immediate diplomatic intervention before it escalated to violence. But the protocols assumed mediators trained in interclan psychology and negotiation techniques that Kavari warriors traditionally considered weakness. Send a warning to both clans to maintain current positions, he ordered. They are not responding to our communications, Commander. Clan Zetekra is deploying their own warships to protect their claims. Gektar's claws scraped against his command chair. In the old days, before the neutral zone, this type of situation would have resolved itself through honorable combat. The stronger clan would take the territory, and the weaker would accept defeat or die trying to prevent it. Simple, clear, decisive. But 3 decades of peace had changed things. Both clans had grown used to prosperity from their mining operations. Their populations had increased. Their ships carried not just warriors, but entire families who had settled in the asteroid mining stations. A war now would be catastrophic in ways that ancient clan conflicts had never been. Open a channel to both clan leaders, he decided. I will speak with them personally. The negotiations lasted 6 hours and nearly ended in combat 3 times. Gektar found himself desperately trying to remember human diplomatic techniques he had barely paid attention to during all those joint meetings. By the time he achieved a temporary ceasefire, he was exhausted and doubting his ability to prevent the next crisis. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other systems began experiencing their own problems. The Dolari trade routes, no longer protected by human patrol ships, became hunting grounds for pirates. Merchant vessels that had traveled safely for decades now required expensive military escorts, driving up the cost of goods. Throughout Council space, the Aquariocean, worlds faced ecological disasters as coral-like organisms began dying without the symbiotic bacteria that humans had, introduced decades earlier. The alien marine biologists had never understood exactly how the microscopic life forms worked, only that they kept the ocean ecosystems healthy. Mining operations on dozens of worlds shut down when human-designed safety systems activated emergency lockdowns. The alien engineers could not override the safety protocols without risking catastrophic accidents, but they also could not restart the operations without understanding the complex fail-safes the humans had built. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the silence from beyond the frontier. Deep space monitoring stations that had expected to track human settlements and transmissions detected nothing. No distress calls, no request for aid, no signs of struggling colonies trying to survive in exile. It was as if humanity had simply vanished into the cosmic void. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrians called an emergency council session to address the growing crisis. The chamber that had been filled with confident voices 6 months earlier now echoed with uncertainty and recrimination. The economic disruption is becoming severe, reported the Dolari representative, his multiple arms gesturing frantically. Shipping costs have increased by 400%. 3 major trade routes are now considered too dangerous for civilian traffic. We are losing billions of credits per day. The Melody delegate spoke through a voice synthesizer, as he was too mentally damaged from the psychic storms to communicate telepathically. Our homeworld remains in crisis. Without human mental shielding technology, our civilization is effectively paralyzed. We must find a way to restore their protective systems. Commander Gektar's report was even more dire. The neutral zone is collapsing. I have managed to prevent open warfare so far, but my forces are inadequate for peacekeeping operations. We need either massive military reinforcement or... He paused, clearly struggling with the words. Or we need human mediators. The younger species delegate spoke of ecological disasters, technological failures, and social unrest as populations that had grown used to human assistance struggled to adapt to their absence. But the older, more powerful species remained silent, unwilling to admit that expelling humanity had been a mistake. Ambassador Kethvar crystalline features reflected the chamber's lighting as he considered the reports. Perhaps, he said carefully, we should attempt to establish communication with human territories beyond the frontier. Not to reverse our decision, but to check on their welfare. The Kavari delegate slammed his armored fist on his speaking platform. We do not crawl back to those we have justly expelled. It would show weakness. What if they are suffering in exile? Asked the Yithrin representative. What if they need assistance? Would it not be honorable to offer aid to a defeated opponent? Several species erupted in angry debate. The idea of approaching humanity for any reason was seen by some as an admission of error, while others argued that checking on their welfare was a moral obligation. In the end, the motion to send an expedition beyond the frontier was voted down by the same coalition that had expelled humanity in the first place. The margin was narrower this time, but pride and fear of appearing weak still outweighed practical concerns. As the session ended and delegates returned to their failing worlds and systems, The silence from human space seemed to grow more ominous. No one wanted to admit what they were all beginning to suspect, that humanity's quiet acceptance of the Council's judgment might have been the most ominous response of all. Meanwhile, deep space monitors continued their lonely vigil, scanning the cosmic dark for any sign of the species they had cast out. And in that darkness, something vast and patient was stirring, though none of them knew it yet. 1 year after humanity's departure, the galactic economy entered complete collapse. Ambassador Keithavar stood before an emergency council session, his crystalline body flickering with stress patterns that had not been seen in living memory. The chamber was only half full. Several species had withdrawn their delegates to deal with crises at home. The situation reports paint a clear picture, Keithavar announced, his voice lacking its usual authority. We are facing the worst galactic crisis in over a millennium. The statistics were devastating. Trade volume had dropped by 70%. 12 major shipping companies had declared bankruptcy. The interstellar communication network was failing as relay stations went unmaintained. Food shortages were spreading as agricultural world struggled without human farming innovations. Commander Gektar, now bearing scars from 3 separate clan wars, delivered his report with barely contained fury. The neutral zone no longer exists. Open warfare has resumed between the clans. My peacekeeping forces have been overwhelmed. We estimate over 2 million casualties in the past 6 months alone. The Melody delegate was absent entirely. The psychic storms had grown so severe that their entire species had retreated into mental isolation, unable to function in a galaxy full of unshielded thoughts and emotions. But the most shocking development came from the Kovash Empire, humanity's old enemies who had been excluded from the Council centuries ago. Their delegate, a hulking insectoid creature, clicked his mandibles in satisfaction as he addressed the assembly. The Kovash Empire extends its thanks to the Council for removing the human obstacle from our expansion path, he announced. We have claimed 17 former human-protected systems and begun relocating populations from our overcrowded homeworlds. We estimate complete conquest of the former neutral territories within 2 years. The Council erupted in outrage. The Kovash had been contained for generations by careful diplomatic pressure and strategic human interventions. Now, with humanity gone and the galaxy in chaos, they were expanding aggressively into any territory they could seize. This is a violation of every treaty governing territorial expansion, the Dalari representative protested. The Kovash delegate's compound eyes glittered with amusement. What treaties? The humans who negotiated most of those agreements are gone. Their peacekeeping forces are withdrawn. Their diplomatic corps has departed. Who exactly is going to enforce these treaties? The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. For centuries, humanity had been the galaxy's informal peacekeepers, mediating disputes and preventing conflicts through patient diplomacy. Other species had assumed this role would be taken up by someone else when humans left. But no one had stepped forward to fill the void. Dr. Yelani, the Aquari marine biologist, presented perhaps the most disturbing report of all. Her homeworld's oceans were dying, and she had discovered why. We have analyzed the symbiotic bacteria that humans introduced to our ecosystems, she explained, her aquatic breathing apparatus bubbling as she spoke. They are not naturally occurring organisms. They were genetically engineered by human scientists, specifically for our ocean chemistry. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The bacteria were designed to live exactly as long as they were useful, then die off naturally if not replenished, Dr. Yelani continued. The humans knew they might someday be asked to leave, so they created biological systems that would fail safely rather than becoming invasive species. The Zephyrian science advisor leaned forward. Are you saying they planned for their own expulsion? I am saying they planned for every possibility, Dr. Yelani replied. Our analysis of other human biotechnology shows the same pattern. Beneficial organisms that enhance ecosystems but die off without continued human intervention. They never created anything that could become dangerous if left unattended. Similar discoveries were being made across the galaxy. Human-designed safety systems had built-in expiration dates. Human agricultural techniques required specific knowledge that had never been fully shared. Human diplomatic agreements included sunset clauses that would void them if human mediators were not available to oversee their implementation. It was not sabotage. It was careful, responsible planning by a species that understood they might not always be welcome. The Ythron delegate, whose people had suffered massive crop failures without human agricultural advisors, stood with barely controlled emotion. They knew this would happen. They prepared for our betrayal while still helping us. How does that not shame every being in this chamber? But shame was a luxury the galaxy could no longer afford. Reports continued to flood in of ecological disasters, economic collapse, and spreading warfare. The Boreshi Mining Consortium had lost 3 entire operations to equipment failures. The Trell Federation was experiencing civil unrest as populations that had grown, dependent on human-mediated resource distribution, fought over dwindling supplies. Then came the transmission that changed everything. Deep Space Monitor Station. Alpha 7 picked up a brief signal from beyond the galactic frontier. It lasted only 30 seconds, but it was broadcast on an open frequency that every Council species could detect. The voice was human, calm and matter-of-fact, speaking in perfect galactic standard. Survey Vessel Magellan reporting. Galactic survey of Sector 7 Alpha complete. New territories secured. Colonization proceeding ahead of schedule. Estimate full development within 5 years. Magellan out. The message sent shockwaves through the Council chambers. Humanity had not curled up and died in exile. They had not struggled to survive on barren worlds beyond the frontier. They were thriving, expanding, building something new in the cosmic dark. More disturbing were the technical details embedded in the transmission. The signal strength suggested broadcast equipment far more powerful than anything in Council databases. The vector analysis indicated the message came from a region of space that long-range surveys had declared completely empty of habitable worlds. A second transmission arrived 3 days later. This one from a different location several light-years away from the first. Colony ship New Horizon reporting successful planetfall on world-designated Terra Nova 7. Population of 50,000 established. Infrastructure development proceeding on schedule. New Horizon out. 50,000 people on a single colony ship. The largest human vessels the Council had ever seen carried maybe 10,000 passengers. And they were establishing colonies in regions that should have been uninhabitable. Emergency meetings were called. Intelligence services scrambled to analyze the transmissions. Scientists studied the technical data for clues about human capabilities they had never suspected. Then the Aquari Deep Space Telescope detected something that made the entire crisis suddenly, terrifyingly clear. "There are ships," Dr. Yelani announced to the Emergency Council session, her voice trembling. "Massive ships moving in formation beyond the frontier. Our instruments can barely detect them at this range, but the energy signatures are unprecedented." She activated the holographic display, showing fuzzy images captured at the very edge of sensor range. The shapes were enormous, dwarfing any vessel in Council space. They moved with purpose and coordination that suggested advanced technology and unified command. "How many ships?" Commander Gektar asked, his warrior's instincts recognizing a threat assessment situation. Dr. Yelani's breathing apparatus bubbled frantically as she checked her instruments. "We have detected at least 300 vessels so far, but the formation extends beyond our sensor range. There could be thousands." The chamber erupted in panicked voices. Some demanded immediate military mobilization, others called for diplomatic overtures. A few suggested evacuation plans for core worlds, but Ambassador Kethvar's crystalline form had gone completely dim, a sign of profound shock among his species. He had realized something that the others had not yet grasped. The humans had not just survived their exile. They had found something out there in the darkness beyond the galactic frontier, something that had ships larger than anything the Council had ever imagined, something that was now moving toward Council space with humanity as their guides. The species that had been dismissed as disruptively helpful were returning. And they were no longer alone. 3 years after humanity's silent departure, the Galactic Council convened for what many believed would be its final session. The chamber was in chaos. Half the delegate seats stood empty as species dealt with civil wars, economic collapse, or ecological disasters. Those who remained looked like survivors of a catastrophe, which in many ways they were. Ambassador Kethvar's crystalline body had developed stress fractures that ran along his limbs like silver scars. Commander Gektar wore battle armor scorched from recent combat. The few remaining delegates huddled together like refugees, united only by their shared desperation. The reports they heard painted a picture of complete civilizational breakdown. The Dalari Consortium had split into 12 warring merchant houses. The Melody remained in psychic isolation, their homeworld effectively cut off from galactic civilization. 3 species had gone completely extinct as their artificially maintained ecosystems collapsed without human intervention. But all of that became secondary when the alert klaxons began blaring throughout the council. Complex, long-range sensors are detecting a massive fleet approaching. Council Space announced the facility's AI system in its maddeningly calm voice. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Fleet composition unknown. Energy signatures do not match any known technology. Through the chamber's transparent dome, they could see the night sky beginning to change. Points of light were appearing where none had existed before, growing brighter by the minute. The approaching fleet was so large it was becoming visible to the naked eye across interstellar distances. Emergency protocols are now in effect, the AI continued. All defensive fleets have been contacted. Military commanders are requesting immediate orders. Commander Gektar stood slowly, his scarred face grim. My remaining forces number less than 1,000 ships. Intelligence estimates suggest the approaching fleet contains tens of thousands of vessels. If they are hostile, resistance would be futile. The Zephyrian science advisor frantically worked at his instruments, trying to analyze the approaching ships. The energy readings make no sense, he reported, his voice cracking with stress. Individual vessels are showing power outputs that exceed our largest space stations. The formation geometry suggests coordination on a scale we have never encountered. As the hours passed and the fleet drew closer, panic spread throughout Council space. Some species attempted to evacuate their core worlds. Others prepared for final battles against impossible odds. A few simply waited, having already lost too much to care about their ultimate fate. Then, when the alien armada was still hours away from Council space, something extraordinary happened. A single familiar ship detached from the formation and accelerated toward the Council complex. It was small compared to the massive vessels around it, but its design was unmistakable. It was a human diplomatic vessel. The ship requested permission to dock at the Council complex. After hasty deliberation, permission was granted. No one knew what else to do. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked into the Council chamber exactly 3 years after she had walked out of it. She looked unchanged, as composed and professional as ever. Behind her walked 2 figures that made every delegate in the chamber fall silent. One was clearly human, but wearing clothes made from materials that seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight. The other was something else entirely. Tall, graceful, with features that suggested vast intelligence and age beyond measure. Its skin seemed to contain entire galaxies, and its eyes held depths that made even looking at it feel like staring into the cosmic infinite. Sarah took her place in the center of the chamber, just as she had 3 years before. When she spoke, her voice carried the same quiet dignity it always had. The Galactic Council judged humanity to be a disruptive influence on galactic stability, she began. We accepted that judgment. We withdrew to avoid causing further disruption to your civilization. She paused, looking around the chamber at the few dozen delegates who remained. In our absence, we discovered that the galaxy extends far beyond the borders of Council space. We made contact with the collective of ancient minds, a confederation of species that has existed for millions of years in the regions you consider empty void. The alien being beside her stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. We have observed your species for eons, Council beings. We watched your civilizations rise and establish their territories. We respected your independence and chose not to interfere. Sarah continued the explanation. The collective became aware of humanity when our exile fleets reached their space. They were curious about a species that chose withdrawal over warfare when faced with injustice. They offered us sanctuary and partnership. But now, the ancient being said, its galaxy-filled eyes reflecting sadness older than stars. The instability from this region threatens to spread beyond your borders. Wars and chaos have a way of consuming everything in their path. The collective has asked us to mediate a solution. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not just survived their exile. They had been adopted by beings so advanced that the entire Council civilization was essentially primitive by comparison. The massive fleet surrounding the Council complex was not an invasion force. It was a peacekeeping intervention. Commander Gektar found his voice first. You have come back to save us." Sarah's expression remained neutral. "We have come back to prevent the collapse of galactic civilization from spreading into collective space. The ancient minds are peaceful beings, but they will protect themselves if necessary." The Ythron delegate, one of the few species that had opposed humanity's expulsion, stepped forward with tears streaming down his face. "We were wrong. We were so terribly wrong. Can you forgive us?" "The past cannot be changed," Sarah replied gently. "But the future remains unwritten. The collective is willing to help stabilize this region of space, but only if the Council accepts certain conditions." She activated a holographic display that showed a new star chart. The familiar galaxy was there, but it was now revealed to be just a small portion of a vast cosmic civilization that stretched across regions they had never imagined. First, all current conflicts must cease immediately. The collective will enforce this if necessary, but prefers voluntary compliance. Second, ecological restoration programs will be implemented to repair the damage caused by technological failures. Third, new governmental structures will be established based on cooperation rather than dominance. The ancient being spoke again, its voice carrying gentle but absolute authority. "We offer guidance, not rule. We seek stability, not conquest. But we will not permit this region to collapse into chaos that threatens peaceful civilizations." Ambassador Kethvar, his crystalline form reflecting the holographic display, asked the question they all needed answered. "And humanity? Will you return to us?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of 3 years of exile and discovery. "Humanity has found a new home among the stars, with friends who value our contributions. We no longer need council space to thrive." The chamber fell silent as the meaning sank in. Humanity was not asking for readmission to the council. They were offering to help stabilize it before returning to their new home among beings far more advanced than anything the council had ever imagined. "However," Sarah continued, "some humans may choose to remain and help implement the collective stabilization programs. This would be voluntary service, not a return to second-class status in council space." Over the following days, the galaxy learned the true extent of what they had lost when they expelled humanity. The collective's intervention prevented complete civilizational collapse, but at a cost. The old order was gone forever. The species that had ruled through dominance and fear found themselves marginalized in a new galactic community based on cooperation and mutual aid. Some adapted and thrived in the new system. Others retreated to their core worlds, unable to accept that their age of supremacy had ended. But all of them learned the same lesson that would echo through galactic history for millennia to come. The greatest strength lies not in demanding respect, but in earning it through service to others. And sometimes the most devastating victory is simply proving that you no longer need those who rejected you. Humanity had left in silence, accepting an unjust judgment with dignity. They returned with the backing of cosmic powers that made the Council's authority seem like a children's game. But their real triumph was not the vast fleet that surrounded Council space or the advanced allies they had. Found out their triumph was that they no longer needed the Council's approval to be who they had always been: healers, builders, peacekeepers, and friends to any who would accept their help. The galaxy would never forget the lesson of humanity's exile and return. But more importantly, it would never again underestimate the species that could leave quietly when rejected, only to return with the cosmos itself at their back.